The Iranian regime has ordered 40 days of national mourning for its assassinated supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Israel says it killed him in a wave of strikes on Iran carried out jointly with the US. Iran has hit back with attacks on Israel and US military bases in several Gulf states. The Pentagon says 3 American soldiers have been killed. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has vowed revenge for the supreme leader's death in a statement read out on state television.
Today, the Interim Leadership Council started its work, and with the help of God, we will continue the path of Imam Khamenei, the path of the dear leader, and the path of all justice seekers in the world with strength. The armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran are acting with strength to destroy the enemy's bases, and they will continue to take action and disappoint the enemies as always.
State media also says that Iran's former president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, has been killed in an airstrike at his home in Tehran. He served as president from 2005 to 2013. Ahmadinejad initially had strong support from the ruling Shiite clergy and hardliners, but his nuclear policy led to sanctions against Iran and an economic crisis. He also came under international criticism for his anti-Semitic remarks. Iran has retaliated with attacks on Israel and on US bases in several Gulf states. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard says it fired 4 ballistic missiles at the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln. The US military says the missiles did not come close to the vessel. In a separate statement on X, the Central Command said 3 American troops have been killed and 5 others seriously wounded. Meanwhile, in Iran, the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei has divided sentiment among Iranians.
The
death of Khamenei was mourned on state TV and in the streets of Tehran. But elsewhere in the capital, Iranians celebrated the news, people dancing and singing, accompanied by car horns. This footage, shown on a phone, shows people toppling a regime symbol in the city of Tehran. This satellite picture shows Khamenei's compound in Tehran, with smoke rising over the heavily damaged building. Iran's Revolutionary Guard responded to the death, vowing to launch the most ferocious operation in history on Israel and US bases. The threat was later repeated in parliament.
We will deal you such terrifying blows that would make you beg. You will see that your fantasies will last only a couple of days.
Trump responded on Truth Social. Iran just stated that they are going to hit very hard today, harder than they have ever hit before. They better not do that, however, because if they do, we will hit them with a force that has never been seen before. But Sunday morning, sirens blared over Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, with interceptions taking place overhead. Iran also fired missiles at the Gulf states in retaliation, with explosions reported in Dubai and Doha. Meanwhile in Tehran, thousands gathered in the city center to mourn the death of Khamenei.
It was shocking news that really fills one with anger, full of hatred towards Israel and America. We must avenge the blood of the leader.
Iranian state television announced a 40-day mourning period and 7 public holidays.
And now let's bring in Cornelius Adebahr. He's a political analyst at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Cornelius, Iran's supreme leader is dead. What kind of scenarios are Iran's neighbors likely to be preparing for now?
They have prepared for this scenario. They have, in fact, warned Washington of this kind of attack because they feared precisely what has happened so far, that Iran would attack its own territory, or their own territories, Persian Gulf states, as much as neighboring states. So that is something where the leaders of the Arab states now have to fear that with the Islamic Republic decapacitated, who will take over, and will they fight even fiercer because they know that the end is nigh, or will they make a compromise at some point with the United States and Israel? But we've already seen those attacks, as you have shown. So there is some anxiety, certainly, in Arab countries.
Now, Israel and the US have called on Iranians to overthrow their government. Is regime change something that Iran's neighbors would also welcome?
Well, first of all, it's easier said or demanded than being done. Already during the protests wave in early January, President Trump instigated the protesters, saying that they should take their destiny in their hands. Help would be on its way. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel did similarly. But it is something where especially countries in the region would watch with dismay if this simply led to chaos, for example. There is no clear-cut path that can be ascertained of how regime change should unfold, whether this would lead, for example, to a breakaway of particular regions inside Iran, whether it would lead to a military takeover, the IRGC being the prime institution for this kind of scenario. So again, the regime of the Islamic Republic was hostile to many of its neighbors, but at least it was something that they could reckon with. Now there is uncertainty to be expected.
Now, after all these attacks on the Gulf states, how isolated is Iran now in the region?
It is isolated. It's been isolated before. That is clear. There was little help coming Tehran's way already during the Israeli-American attacks from last summer. Hezbollah at the time, its main militia ally, did not intervene on its side and attack Israel. This could be different this time because it's clear what is in the offing. It could be the end of the Islamic Republic and therefore also the end of any support for Hezbollah. Whereas in the last summer, there must have been a calculation that one can somehow outlast the current or the then current attacks. So really, this is a moment probably for some of the militias to think whether they can throw their weight behind this probably last defense of the Islamic Republic. So here there is still some elements of surprise if, for example, Hezbollah or militias in Iraq or the Houthis in Yemen, they would enter this war on Iran's side.
Now, if we're looking at the scale of Iran's retaliation, several waves of drones and missiles against other Gulf states, what is the regime trying to say with that?
Well, it is trying to signal steadfastness. It's trying to increase the damage and the pain also on the attackers. The drones, many of the drones appear to have been intercepted. That's the weakness of this kind of weapon. Missiles appear to have been more successful, and Iran has a couple of thousands of missiles also produced after the attack of last year. So it seems to be saying that they will defend themselves. The regime will defend itself. It's also signaling to the inside that there is no room for protests, no room for an uprising internally. So for the moment, this can of course change, but for the moment, the regime displays its resolve to be fighting as much as they can.
Now, it might be a bit early to answer this question, but how could the events that we've seen so far this weekend reshape the whole Middle East?
Well, the positive scenario, and this is maybe what President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have in mind, is that somehow following their attacks, the regime will be overthrown, whether by, we can't expect a pluralist democratic system come out of this very soon, but if at least there is a regime which is more amenable to American and Israeli demands, that could be called a success from their side. But it is just as well possible that we see a continued chaos, that Iran is, because it cannot be bombed into submission, that it will uphold the resistance, that the attacks will continue, that it will be hard for the United States or Israel to call it off and find a safe way, face-saving way out of this. So this could be a more long-term scenario, but at the same time, if the Islamic Republic crumbles, it could also be the crumbling of Iran as a nation state. This is probably the worst outcome that one could expect, but here is what military planners have to contend with.
Cornelius Adebahr from the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you very much for this analysis. Now let's bring in DW correspondent Stella Männer, who is standing by in Beirut for us. Stella, with Iran's leader killed, what has the reaction been from the regime's proxies in Lebanon, namely Hezbollah?
We have very different statements from the religious leaders of the Shia community as well as Hezbollah. Both are known to be quite close to Iran. The highest religious leader of the Shia community here in Lebanon condemned Khamenei's death, saying that it was a crime, and he named Khamenei a martyr who survived crimes, genocide and terrorism. We also have a statement by Nabi Berri, who's the parliamentary speaker of Lebanon, and he's also the head of Amal party, which is a close ally to Hezbollah. Berri also condemned the death, and he said that the death of Khamenei is a profound loss for the resistance. And of course, we also have a statement by Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem. He is mourning the death as well, and he said that Hezbollah is now continuing its path, whatever that will mean. People here, we're waiting to hear from Naim Qassem just to get some indicators on what Hezbollah might do now and if Hezbollah might react. But of course, this is a very vague statement. In Dahia, the southern suburbs of Beirut, there are some people who gathered in the morning spontaneously to express their condolences. They were waving with Hezbollah flags, and this afternoon there will be a bigger gathering to mourn Khamenei.
Now, what are the chances that Hezbollah, for example, will respond to this killing of Khamenei?
Well, of course, this is the question of the hour. Hezbollah is a close ally. It is Iran's most important proxy in the region. And therefore, on one hand, it is quite obvious that Hezbollah should respond and could be part of a reaction by Iran. But on the other hand, Hezbollah is in a very difficult situation when it comes to its standing within the country. First of all, Hezbollah has lost a lot of its military capacity in the last 2.5 years of war. So it is much more weakened now than it was before. It's not the strong proxy that it used to be. And on the other hand, Hezbollah has also lost a lot of support among its supporters in its own community. Many people here in Lebanon are just tired and see Hezbollah as the main source of conflict. They say that the organization is just dragging the country into war and conflict. And we know for sure that in case Hezbollah would participate in a retaliation from Iran towards, for example, Israel, that then Israel would heavily attack Lebanon. The Israeli government said before that they would specifically target civilian infrastructure such as the Beirut airport. So another war with Israel would mean that Hezbollah could completely lose the weapons that are left and also lose the little bit of support that is still left after the last 2.5 years of war.
Now, is there concern in Lebanon that this conflict in Iran could escalate into a wider conflict? And what would that mean for the country?
Definitely. And I mean, this is what we've seen in the last day and in the last couple of hours. There are already so many attacks in the entire region. And for Lebanese people, it is very new, and also for the people in the entire region to see that really among so many countries that there are so many ongoing attacks. And of course, people here fear that in case that Hezbollah might join, that then there will be a big war in Lebanon as well, and that there will be more casualties in the civilian sector, more aims and targets onto civilian infrastructure, and this is what everyone wants to avoid. On the side of the Lebanese authorities, there is also a big concern. Today was a meeting in Babda of the politicians of the new Lebanese government. They were trying to discuss what they can do in such a situation. It is known that there have been talks by various different parties. Of course, this again is a very vague statement, so we don't know exactly if there have been any agreements, but for sure everyone is very much in alert. There has also been a crisis committee that has been founded now, and they have ensured, or they are saying and telling the population here in Lebanon that they will work on finding solutions that food supply will remain working, because people, of course, in Lebanon here are also worried that in case the airport gets attacked or the port in Beirut gets attacked, that this could cause a difficult situation where food supply chains are being cut.
Stella Männer, they're reporting from Beirut for us. Thank you, Stella. Well, another key player watching this crisis very closely is, of course, Turkey. Let's cross over to our correspondent, Julia Hahn, who is standing by in Istanbul. Julia, Iran has struck countries across the region, not Turkey. Is Incirlik Air Base effectively untouchable?
No, I don't think you can say that any U.S. military site here in the region right now is untouchable. But you're right in saying that so far there haven't been any Iranian strikes on Turkish territory on the Incirlik Air Base or on any other U.S. military site. And President Erdogan, last evening in a televised address, he told people that Turkey has no issue with its border security or airspace security, and that additional precautions have been taken. But Incirlik Air Base is a key strategic U.S. military base in southern Turkey near the city of Adana. It's been used for U.S. and NATO operations here in the region. And of course, Turkey being a NATO member, you know, the alliance has Article 5 collective defense responsibility. So any sort of Iranian attack on Turkey could, of course, turn this into a whole different war overnight. And I think this is one of the reasons why Turkey has been trying very hard not to be dragged into this conflict, this war. President Erdogan, he condemned both the Israeli-American attacks on Iran yesterday, but also Iran's retaliatory strikes on Gulf countries. He called for de-escalation. He urged more mediation efforts, and Turkish officials have insisted that Turkish territories and installations will not be used by the U.S. for any sort of offensive action against Iran. And I think this is Ankara trying to make sure it is not being viewed as a target by Iran.
Now, that really fits the profile, though. Erdogan has positioned himself as a mediator before. Do you think there is any appetite in Turkey to play a mediator role now?
Yes, definitely there is, because the Turkish leadership, you know, is very concerned about the prospect of a prolonged, wider regional war with significant instability right at its doorstep. Turkey and Iran share a more than 500-kilometer long border, and that would, any sort of escalatory situation would bring political costs, social costs. Turkey is worried about energy supplies, about rising energy costs, which would hurt the already ailing Turkish economy even more. They're concerned about a massive influx of refugees from Iran. They're also concerned about Kurdish groups in Iran that could capitalize on instability and chaos. Turkey views these groups as affiliated with the outlawed PKK. And I think that helps explain why Turkey has been very strongly opposed to any foreign intervention in Iran. They have been trying to mediate. They have been trying to bring the U.S.-Iran talks to Istanbul. They were later moved, as we know, to Oman and Geneva, but without direct Turkish involvement. And when I look at the phone diplomacy that is going on right now, President Erdogan said he talked to U.S. President Trump, also to the Iranian president. I think Turkey would very much like to have a bigger say over any sort of future negotiations.
Our correspondent Julia Hahn there, reporting from Istanbul about the Turkish stance on this situation in Iran. Thank you very much, Julia.